What an exciting day we're having, and I'm very excited about today's webinar. This is actually a monthly experience for ThirdPath. We have something called Thursdays with ThirdPath, where we get really creative people out there showing us that we can do things in a different way. We can follow a third path where we integrate work and life, where we do that flexibility that 1 million for work flexibility is working so hard to promote. And today we have a special guest, Christine Carter. I read her book probably over a year ago and was just really thrilled by what she was talking about. So many interesting ideas that really resonated for my own life and immediately helped me think smarter about how I could live my life in a way that was true to what I cared about. So we're really just thrilled to have Christine Carter here today. And you'll be hearing some of the really smart ideas she's shared in her book, and probably has some new ideas that she'll be sharing as well. So, Christine, welcome, Emma. We're so glad to be doing this jointly with you. It really feels like, yeah, a really great experience. So I'm going to ask Bree to put up the next slide. We'll talk a little bit about ThirdPath, and then I'll pass it on to Emma. So ThirdPath Institute, we've been around for 15 years. We have been working with families and professionals and leaders to help them follow that integrated approach, often using flexibility as a way to make it work, sometimes working reduced hours, and learning to really share things at home and share in the responsibilities of families as well. As you can see, we do have this free event, Thursdays with ThirdPath, once a month that you can join. And we've got resources for all kinds of people to help them follow this integrated approach to work and life. So that's a little bit about ThirdPath. How about 1 million for work flexibility? We're so glad you're doing this with us today. Emma?
Thanks, Jessica. And Bree, if you could go to the next slide. We're so pleased to be doing this event with you as well. And in terms of what 1 million for work flexibility is, we're essentially an awareness campaign around the issue of work flex. We launched in October 2013, and our goals are twofold. We're uniting the many great organizations that are already advocating for change in this space, along with employers who are proud to be flexible. Our coalition started with the founder of our movement, which is FlexJobs, but now includes more than 90 fantastic groups, including, we're so pleased to say, ThirdPath. And then we're also really creating a community for workers nationwide to voice their support for work flexibility, and using the community to help educate, mobilize, and offer resources for workers who are looking for flex, and really help normalize flexibility so that it's not marginalized as an accommodation for just a few workers, but is recognized as a practice that really makes strong business sense. So if you haven't done so already, we encourage you to please sign up to join the movement at workflexibility.org and keep in touch with us on social media. And Bree, if you could go to the next slide, please. So today we are just thrilled to be doing this event with ThirdPath, and to welcome Christine Carter to talk with us today. So Christine is a sociologist and senior fellow at UC Berkeley's Greater Good Science Center. She's been on Oprah, Dr. Oz, The Today Show, my personal favorite, The Daily Show, among many others, talking about the science of happiness and productivity. And so Christine, really thank you so much for joining us today. We're just thrilled to have you. And now, so you haven't always been happy in your life, and in fact you open your book by sharing a story of a friend who was dying of cancer and whose illness had you reflecting on your own life. And you discovered at that point that you were so overwhelmed that your first instinct was that it really would have come as a relief to be told that you had a terminal illness, which is something, you know, that's quite dramatic. So clearly things were out of whack, and that helped you start your personal journey to address that. So can you tell us more about where you were at that place?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I think I would have told you I was really happy.
Interesting. Okay.
Everything was going exactly as I'd ever hoped, right? That I had, I was the executive director at that point of the Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley, and I had just published Raising Happiness, so I was sort of publicly declaring my own happiness and ability to raise happy children to the world with that book, and I had speaking engagements really all over the place, and And I also had flexibility in that I was picking my kids up from school 3 days a week, and I just felt like I finally had it all, except for one thing, which was my health. I was just really, it's not that I was that ill, it was just I was so exhausted all the time. So I had gone, like, my path was, I was definitely I'm a very sensitive, anxiety prone type person. And I had gone from, having clinical levels of anxiety to, over the course of a decade, sort of working my way out of that to a place of much greater happiness and much less anxiety. But I was still, in this place of, like, now that I have everything I ever wanted and I'm not, in therapy or taking medication for anxiety or anything, I just was so tired all the time, right? Like, I didn't want to get everything in my life that I had was so hard won. And so I didn't want to give anything up. And so every time somebody suggested that I slow down, or my mom, always well-meaning but very anxious herself, always saying, you can't have it all, you're going to have to give something up, it just felt to me like such a big loss. And so I didn't. I just didn't sleep enough. I caught every virus on every airplane I was on. I had chronic strep throat, which was, like, not as horrible as it might sound, but it did mean that I was on antibiotics all the time. 9 courses of antibiotics in 18 months. And that is no way to live. So when we did this thing that, so Lee Lipsenthal was a really wonderful man and friend and doctor. He tried to help people with stress, and when he was diagnosed with esophageal cancer, and it became clear he wasn't going to live, he led me and a group of friends through a death meditation where we really reflected on what we would need to do if we found out that we were going to die, and who we would need to talk to, and how we would really want to spend our remaining time. And for me, it was really an emotional thing. I think it was emotional for everybody, but it came with this, like, really profound sense of shame for me, because here was my, dear friend who actually was going to die and leave behind children and a wife he loved who were just, it was just really a very sad thing. And the emotion that came to me in the death meditation was relief, right? Like, that not that I was going to die, but that I suddenly didn't have to do all of the things I felt like I should do. So it really created a very strong awareness for me that I was shooting on myself, right? Like, I was doing a lot of things that just to sort of keep up appearances, and that for the wrong reasons. And it kind of coincided with a downturn in my health, and all of that was a low point, which was really an epiphany for me that I had the tools that I needed to live a very different sort of life, that I wasn't going to have to give up the things that were important to me, and that I needed to get it together, right? That here I was, at that point, been an expert on elite performance and productivity and happiness for more than a decade, and I was, trying to check myself into the hospital for a kidney infection so I wouldn't have to go on a trip. It was there was a lot, maybe more than you wanted to hear about it.
No,
all.
I mean, absolutely, it's an amazing story, and I think it's important for us all to recognize that we all deal with these challenges, no matter how perfect things might look to from the outside. And one of the things you talk about is the natural rhythm of life, and that we have these cycles that maybe we need to pay more attention to, and especially at work. Can you speak more to what that rhythm is all about?
Yeah, I had just started denying my own need for rest. And we human beings, like it or not, are animals, and we have more in common with a tree than we do a computer, right? But we treat ourselves like computers in that we try and run multiple apps at any one given time, right? We're always multitasking, and we just expect ourselves to be able to work 24/7 with an occasional reboot, and really, what we need to do is learn to obey the cycles of the natural world that we belong in. So in a given 24-hour day, we have natural cycles of about an hour and a half. If you look at our brain waves, those are called ultradian rhythms. And then, of course, we have our circadian rhythm, which is the 24-hour day, and our sort of the way our biology is keyed to the light. And then, of course, there's sort of seasonal rhythms as well. And I had just gone into full denial on all of those things. So, it was an interesting experience for me to sort of wake up and realize I wasn't walking the talk in all the ways that I could. And that that what was different for me about this than it might have been for somebody else who was living a similar lifestyle is that I actually had all the tools. Like, I understood pretty well, the whole concept of how people give themselves jet lag from just not having regular sleep and rest cycles. And I understood the neuroscience behind a lot of it, and I understood how to kind of what I needed to do. I just wasn't road testing the tools I was creating out of the science well enough, so that it would actually work in my own life. So we do understand so much, but there's such great science around productivity and happiness and just sort of overall well-being. It's just that we don't heed it. We don't want to believe that we are animals.
Putting it into practice is tough. Yes, no, please go ahead.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, I think that's exactly where we're leading into, Christine, is the idea that your book is teaching us some of the science of this. And that, we're going to get to a slide where we talk about the importance of time to relax, and that there's ways, that we can really do some things that really make our lives better. We're actually going to show a slide a little later where we show a full cup of water, and the idea that too many of us, fill our lives up to the brim, and that sometimes spilling over the top, and that can really cause that kind of this life that you were just describing, and that there's really a shift that happens where you say, wait a minute, I don't want to constantly be filled up to the brim. Maybe there's going to be a month or a season where I'll be filled up to the brim, but I really need to be careful to have another period of time where I slow things down. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of that science in a second before we go to the next slide. Something shifted, though. You had, what was it? Do you remember what a first or second step you took to make that change in your approach, or did it require you trying, not getting it quite right, trying again? What was the way?
Yeah, it was definitely iterative in the sense that I mean, for me, it was a pretty dramatic shift because I cannot even tell you how embarrassed I felt at the relief that flooded in during this death meditation with my friend, right? You have somebody who you have what he would give anything for, right? Which is my life. And so what shifted was really just the awareness that if I couldn't do it, nobody could. And so it just became this sort of sense of real purpose. And that really I had already sort of been making the shift, but I needed the confidence. I just needed to know that I could do it, right? And I woke up with this really profound sense that I could, and that the first step was really awareness. When I was doing things that were really out of integrity for me, in terms of like, did I really feel like it was the right thing to do, or was I doing it to sort of live up to some impossible ideal that
Right.
that you know what I mean? So just becoming aware of like, okay, am I doing this because I feel like I should do it and because other people expect me to do it, or am I doing it because I really feel like it's the right thing to do, right? That it's actually going to be productive. It's actually going to be a good use of my time.
Yeah, so you'll actually see we took some of the steps out of your book. So towards the end, we'll be talking about some of these steps. And that right out of your book, you said you noticed your feelings, step 1. You untangled your thoughts, step 2. And then you took responsibility to course correct. And by the way, I'm sure you didn't do just step 1, step 2, step 3, done. It was iterative. You kept on learning from that process. So wonderful. And I wasn't surprised to hear that it was an iterative process. Being someone who really tries to practice some of these ideas myself, it's amazing how 15 years into running ThirdPath, we're still learning how to do things better. So wonderful. Bree, I'm going to let you put up the next slide. So one of the things that I really took away from your book is that there's some real science that we can pay attention to, that our bodies and our minds are deeply linked. And it was just so important for me to notice that in your book and to think about that and what did it mean. It kind of helped explain why some things made me feel better or some things made me feel worse. So right from the start in chapter 2, you talk about, you're trying to look at the stress or success tipping point, reducing stress in our lives, increasing that feeling of feeling like we're doing the right things, the things we care most about, and the right amount of things. And then I love that point that, in stress, we're in fight or flight mode, and that literally the prefrontal cortex shrinks. But you also talk about that there's things we can do to counter stress, and including the point on the third point, that even imagining our future success or researching things that energize us can kind of tip us into a better place away from stress. Do you want to talk a little bit about this idea of the stress success tipping point and some of the things we can do to counter stress?
Sure. I think that the key thing that most people miss is that, well, first of all emotions have a function and they have a physiological effect, right? So we kind of understand this intuitively when it comes to emotions like anger or anxiety. We know, like, we can feel our heart rate going up or our palms getting sweaty or something like that. Like, we know that it's affecting us physiologically. The positive emotions have their primary function, at least from a physiological standpoint, is to counter that stress response, that fight or flight response. So if you have a good laugh or take time to like really cultivate gratitude around something and you feel that gratitude, what's going to happen is that it's going to trigger your vagus nerve and the parts of your physiology that are going to calm you down, are going to lower your heart rate. Excuse me. So, so simply by paying more attention to the things that bring more positive emotions into our lives, not only do we feel happier, but we also change our physiology. And this is a really important thing because we tend to think of play and laughter and happiness and all the positive emotions as being sort of like a nice to have. And wouldn't it be great if I had time to practice gratitude or whatever, but I just don't. It's like gravy on life. But actually it changes our brain function significantly enough that I really think that they're our best efficiency tool, right? If what we want is to learn how to work smarter instead of just always working harder, And if we want to get more, accomplish more, but by doing less, we need to do so from a place of real positivity, because our brains work very differently from a place of relaxation and, when primed with a positive emotion. Because those positive emotions basically open up a whole part of your brain to, greater blood flow, which means more oxygen and more blood sugar, more, higher, it's a higher functioning, you become a higher functioning individual. So, they aren't just sort of nice to have, right? If you get so exhausted that you're just irritable all the time, and I just say, I shouldn't say you, that's where I was, right? I was so tired that I just was starting to not find life as fun or funny as I used to, and I was just annoyed with everyone all the time. That's just it's a common thing to happen when we're tired, but when it happens in a way, basically then you slow down all your brain processes, you cut off access to the part of your brain that you need to do your best work, basically, to operate not instinctive.
What I hear in it, it was like reading your book. It was kind of like, oh, so that's why that was such a good thing. So, for example, in my life, my husband would be in charge of the kids 2 days a week, and then earlier in the week, and I was in charge of the kids after school Thursdays and Fridays. And I always remembered by Thursday afternoon, my brain was kind of dead, and I'd hang out with my kids, and we'd run around and laugh, and we'd play, and we'd do goofy things. And I think when I read your book and listening to you today, it's like, oh, by setting up flexibility in my life, by setting some limits around how much time I spent at work, by playing with my kids a couple afternoons, my workplace was benefiting because I was getting rid of some of that stress. I was opening up my brain to more creativity, and that's what it felt like, but I never had the language for it. So it was really fun to read about that and see, that was really working well. So I totally get it.
Yeah, I mean, this is actually something that we really know to be true in that, so creativity comes from having downtime. So when we have some downtime to play or just stare into space and daydream or whatever, our brain actually becomes much more active. Excuse me, I'm so sorry, I have a little tickle in my throat. And what your brain is doing is drawing connections between things that it didn't previously see as related. And that's where all of our creative insight comes from.
Yeah.
And so there's that playtime that you had with your kids that had two functions. One, it enabled the part of your brain responsible for creative insight to come online and draw those connections, which then fuels that, the home run ideas that you have later. But also it provides more data, basically, to draw those connections on. So we know that the most creative people have the most hobbies, they have the strangest hobbies, they spend a considerable amount of time focused on things, or not necessarily focused, but doing things that aren't directly related to the problems that they're trying to solve or the things that they are trying to create, whether they're an inventor or writing a book or just solving a marketing problem, right? The most creative people have a lot of stimulus. We know stimulus is a huge part of new ideas and innovations, but what we don't acknowledge in our society is that stimulus comes outside of work, right? And children are an excellent source of stimulus. It has to just be different from, it has to be brain activity that's really different from the problem. You have to give your brain something to work with. And having a life outside of work, especially one that fuels positivity, is the best way to do that.
Yeah, and I think one of the fun things we've been learning about at ThirdPath is that, children provided this really easy way for me to do this, and now I'm an empty nester and I have to kind of reinvent myself and think in new ways about how to fill in that space that was so wonderful and delightful. So wonderful. Well, I'm going to go to the next slide, not because there isn't more to say about this one, but I thought another amazing thing that you talk about in the book, and I think this really plays out both at the workplace and at home, or you point out anywhere we are, that our positive emotions can be amplified. And I just thought that was so interesting, that, it wasn't just that me walking in a positive way to my home had a positive effect, or me walking into my workplace with a positive emotions had a positive amplifying effect. And it wasn't just I was happy, I could actually influence, and there would be this influence between people around that. Can you speak a little bit about that, that positive emotion amplifier?
Sure, sure. I mean, we've long since known, like if you look at all the research in psychology and sociology on well-being, going back hundreds of years, the single strongest finding is that a person's happiness is best predicted by their connections to other people, their positive connections to other people, the breadth and the depth of their relationships. And it turns out this is the way that we are hardwired. Even if you're an introvert, right? You're still hardwired to be a part of a tribe, right? To feel connected to other people, because it's a survival mechanism, right? Our nervous system feels safe in the presence of other people, and that and also our nervous system does not really perceive ourselves to be separate than the people who are around us. So if I'm looking into your eyes and you laugh, there's a little part of my brain that lights up as though I am the one that is laughing, right? Our brain activity mirrors each other's much more than we really realize. So something that I think is funny, and then you laugh, and then we're both laughing together, you just get a much bigger hit of the positive physiological effects of that positive emotion than if you were just laughing alone.
And again, I think about, this, here's Christine walking into the workplace before she had all this insight, and here's Christine walking into the workplace now that she's had some insight and put her kind of life back into a place that felt more meaningful and on target for what she wanted. How that would impact your fellow workers too, to be those two different Christines. And so to me, it's like what we're really learning is that, just to relate to 1 million flexibility too, when we really support people to work the way they want, to flex work, to have time for their lives, it becomes this positive amplifier for the people that they're working with. And obviously when they come home and they're feeling more satisfied, a positive amplifier for what's happening. So to me, it just, again, I felt like, oh, right, me being very intentional to live a life that I liked isn't just good for me. It's good for the people I work with. It's good for my family.
And it's really good for your whole neighborhood too.
Yeah.
I mean, there is data on that the ripple effect it's not just your immediate family or your workplace, although it is both of those things, right? I always tell parents who are like, oh, I just want my kids to be happy. I'm like, well, the best thing that you could do is become happy yourself because of the ripple effect there. And at the workplace, the same thing is true, but also at the sort of community level, we see it because, it's not just, I now understand that any positive emotion that I express has the potential to be amplified and be more powerful if I share it with somebody else. So it's made me more extroverted, right? Like I'm really committed to, like, I'm a very chatty person in public, right? I look people in the eye, I smile at people passing by, I chat with the grocery checker. It's like a challenge within myself to try and see how many people I can get to smile, or laugh or whatever.
And to literally imagine that you're lighting up a part of your brain and that is lighting up a part of their brain, I think that's just such a very powerful, it's more than just, be nice to people. This is a physiological response that can really create more positivity, which I think is kind of amazing. I'm keeping one eye on the clock. And Bree, I'm going to have you skip the next slide because I think we're really ready to go into some of the stuff that Emma was going to talk about with Christine.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jessica. This is fascinating. So we've been talking about positivity and the importance of relationships, and even when we have the best intentions with our relationships, we can come up we can come up against what you call, Christine, connection diseases. So if we could talk about a few of these and the solutions that you offer. So the first is technology misuse, and this is really so critical from a work perspective and from the flex side of things. And I think we really have to remember that technology isn't the enemy. So I love this idea of misuse. It's us who have to figure out how to use technology correctly. And when it comes to building relationships, there are sort of two sides to the coin here. One is, how do we make sure that technology doesn't get in the way? And the other is, how can we use technology to actually make relationships stronger? So if you could speak to that a bit about multitasking and just technology misuse.
Sure. Well, I think that the first one is the multitasking error that so many of us make, and this is, once again, we treat ourselves like our phone, right? And but from an evolutionary standpoint, we can't do two things at once. Our brain did not evolve to be able to do that. And so we think that we can run multiple apps, right? That we can kind of keep an eye on our email and while we are on a conference call and read our texts at the same time or whatever, and it just doesn't work. So our brain will just switch really rapidly between these tasks. And in order to switch really rapidly between tasks, a lot of people think that they are really good at multitaskers, and they actually might be okay at it relative to other people. They might be good at it relative to other people, but what happens when you need to switch rapidly between tasks, you draw on an attentional network in your brain that is very energy inefficient. So it creates a lot of tension in your body, and both the switching and the tension in your body that it creates, they're just giant energy sucks, right? They're going to make you feel stressed and tired, and they will put you into at least a very low level fight or flight, right? So they start to make you not as good at what you're doing, and it creates a lot of the stress and exhaustion that we feel. So so I see your little asterisk here. I actually multitask all the time because I have a treadmill desk. You can, although the research here is still mixed, and so it's not 100%, but I actually believe that you definitely can move while you learn things. Like, you can do a cognitive task, and while you, a lot of times on my conference calls, I'll sweep the floor. I don't know, it's just like helps me to a very clean floor. I don't know, those things that don't, you just can't do two cognitive things at once without creating some stress. Now, the brain did evolve to be very novelty seeking. Most people don't realize that even though there are individual variations in how novelty seeking we are, all of our brains did evolve to be extremely novelty seeking, because looking for new sources of food was a primary source of survival back in the hunter-gatherer era, which is, a theory, of course, but it makes good sense to explain why, more than anything, our brain is just real interested in new. So it's just, when you see that you have a new email, for example, it's just, you could be super focused on whatever it is you're doing, and that can be really fulfilling work, but once your brain sees that there is a new email in your inbox from that alert or whatever, it will switch. You're already gone. It's already lost, right? You've already lost a certain amount of attention based on that. So just knowing that your brain is really novelty seeking can help us structurally set ourselves up to not be distracted, right? To not watch the email count go up, to close your email app while you're working, and to put your messages on silent and turn all the alerts off, and really give yourself time to focus on one thing at a time. So this was one of the biggest switches that I made, was setting aside a few hours every morning to really just do my most important, most focused work. And and it's amazing how much you can get done. And one thing that I was doing that I have since learned through my coaching practice is really common, is I would leave my focus work to do at home when it was quiet and the flood of emails and messages started to die down, and after the kids had gone to sleep. And so it was basically like I was trading sleep for my most important work, and moving that back into the workday by simply just allowing myself to focus, or unitasking, was one of the things that made the biggest difference for me, for sure. And then you say here, no daydreaming time. That we sort of touched on this a little bit earlier in that. So creative insight is one of the most powerful sort of things that we can do to, I mean, there's nothing easier and there's nothing more powerful than a creative insight, right? So that's, you know, it's a great tool for performance and productivity, and also for happiness, really, and fulfillment and meaning. And we need that time, that play time, that daydreaming time for the part of our brain which is responsible for creative insight to come online. So when we're like just waiting in line, for example, if we just stare into space and let our mind wander, that is actually a better use of our time than checking our email. Even though it doesn't feel productive, there's usually a big, this is a huge thing, that how productive we feel rarely correlates with how productive we actually are, right? The feelings of gratification that come from checking our email is not, you know, it makes us feel like we're working and like we're productive and like we're doing something, but it's a big lie. It's a big trick your body plays on you and your brain plays on you. Doesn't matter how you feel, right? It doesn't, you know, it's really not about feelings of productivity as much as it is about behaviors that lead to actual productivity.
Such a key point. I think we can all relate to being in those experiences, and to have that sense that, you know, that checking that email is not going to get you where you think it is is very important. Thinking about time here, I know, you know, there are a number of other of these challenges, and overwork clearly is one of them, and it's critical to set boundaries and to take that time to step away. One of the things here, envy, we mentioned, and you talk about how envy can really get in the way of relationships, and it's important to turn those feelings around and really celebrate other people's successes, and that success isn't a win-lose proposal. And we just mentioned, flagged here, that, you know, that comes up with flexibility, in the sense that folks can be envious of, you know, flex that someone else might have, or there's a fear that they might be envious, and, you know, that's really not necessary. We can take a step back from that, realize there's no one size fits all, that it's possible for different workers to have, you know, different types of flexibility and be more than satisfied. And so just thinking about time here, we're going to move on, Bree, if we could, to slide number 10, please. And if we could get more into the science of the sweet spot here, in particularly around mastery, and these are such important points, what you talk about, because we get into such a rut around working the way that work has always been done without really reflecting on what's truly required to do something well. And some of the things that you highlight are counterintuitive when we think of the traditional work landscape. And one is that the promise of a raise, which is an extrinsic motivator, is actually not going to help us achieve mastery. We really need to have passion for our work, an intrinsic motivator. And we need to also allow ourselves to fail. Can you talk a little more about how failure is a component of mastery?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know, certainly we can have more than micro failures, right? Like I really saw my own illness and everything that, you know, the things that brought me to the precipice of this whole project and writing the sweet spot and changing my life. That, I mean, nothing could be more important than having had those, you know, failures, and sort of some of them kind of major, because failure sort of shows you what needs to change, right? I think as a sort of a historically a perfectionist and an overachiever, I never really would let myself see where I was making mistakes because I was so defended around my own achievement and perfectionism, and I was really holding myself back by not saying, wait a minute, this is a major failure in my life, right? Like I need to do things differently here. So failure is really important. Making mistakes is really important. To push yourself to the point where you have challenged yourself, right? You've pushed yourself past the point of success. So you're not holding yourself back. You're really going for it, and you're taking risks and accepting that that you're not going to make every shot, right? And if you are making every shot, you're holding yourself back, right? You're sort of realizing your potential while at the same time acknowledging that your best source of information about how to grow and how to improve your life is going to come from the mistakes that you make. So that means looking at the mistakes that you're making, admitting them, telling people about them, letting other people's perspectives, weigh in, not on what you quote unquote should do, but what you might be able to learn from the mistakes that you've made. So if I had never, for example, admitted to my group of friends that I actually felt relief when going through the death meditation, which in a different part of my life, I never would have admitted that to people. Some of whom were, some of the people in the room were, names that you would recognize, and it was really an embarrassing thing for me. But to come to terms with the fact that that is significant, right? And to sort of air our failures and air our mistakes, that's where you get the support and the insight and the from yourself and from other people that you need to grow, to improve your life.
Thank you, Christine. And we've talked already really about our need for rest. And Jessica, I'll just check in with you. Shall we go to slide 12? Do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's another important concept.
Okay, great. And I'll turn it over to you.
Great. What we're doing, Emma, is that every story you've been telling has been so important. We didn't want to shorten any of them. So we're shortening which slides we look at, and making sure we get to the end and give people some time to ask some questions. This has been awesome. I really resonate a lot with what you just talked about a kind of a willingness to be honest with ourselves and to share that honest observation with somebody else. Actually, it's been a very important part of how I've made change. And it's relevant to this slide, and I think relevant to your story too. What we've learned at ThirdPath, here's this story about these full glasses. It's easy in today's world to start looking at those two glasses on the left. We fill our lives up so full that we don't have time for the quote-unquote big rocks, the most important things that we want to make time for. And then something happens, work-wise sometimes life-wise, and suddenly we're working nights and weekends to try to get to it, or we're just feeling stressed nights and weekends trying to take care of the family responsibilities. So there's a tendency in today's world to look like those two glasses on the right, where we fill our lives up way too full, and then it gets to a point where it's even beyond that point. And what we were learning at ThirdPath, and what you learned in your story, is that really we want to move to those two glasses on the left, to really create a life where we have some space, some breathing room, some time to reflect, daydream, play, laugh, dance, have that space. And then, yes, there's going to be those times when life gets very full again, but then to kind of pull back and get to that more place where we have that quiet time, that time for rejuvenation, creativity, joy. And so, that's been a big thing we've learned at ThirdPath. And again, when I read your book, I felt like, wow, she is really talking about the science of why this is so important for us to really move to the left, although today's world pushes us to the right. There's more I want to say about your book is helping people think about how to make this change for themselves, and I'll talk in a second about how this plays out for teams. But anything, what does that resonate with you, the idea that we fill ourselves up like glasses to the brim and that we really need to try to do that differently? What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I think it's incredibly important. The far left glass is what I think is really important about it is that that big rocks piece of it is bigger. And what I want people to realize is that the more quiet time or play time or whatever downtime that they and rest that they give people, the less time they will have to spend managing others on email, in meetings, because your efficiency just picks up in a way that it is really remarkable, and I don't want anybody to take my word for it. It's it requires some technology detox and stepping away from overwork in a way that I talk about in greater detail in the book. But once you experience it, what you realize is that all of those right glasses where it was sort of like, the constantly working at or beyond full capacity, it's just there's a lot of hamster wheeling that goes on, right? A lot of things that are very, very inefficient. So there is something so super counterintuitive to having more playtime and more downtime and taking more breaks and getting more sleep. But it narrows the things that feel like, have taken over our lives, like email.
Yeah, and I think what we're starting to see, and we won't have time to talk about this today, we'll do it on another Thursday with ThirdPath webinar, is we're now working with a work team about this because two of the people on the team have realized that they've gotten into chronic overwork, and those two people have been working very hard to kind of set some better boundaries, but they realized that they needed the whole team to get smarter about it. And otherwise, they came in and they were trying to set some boundaries around work time, but everybody was feeling overworked, and they felt bad about setting boundaries. So I think the next stage is to start helping groups start getting smarter about this, or families, to get off the gerbil wheel and slow things down and create that time for reflection, laughter, whatever, the fun stuff too. And I couldn't underscore enough how true it is that when teams do this, when individuals do this, they do actually find smarter ways to get their work done. It's just amazing. I've seen that too. It's a big fact. All right, so we're going to go on to the next slide. I'm going to take us through this quickly. But I thought it was just amazing to see how much what you were talking about in your book is what we've seen at ThirdPath as well. That really, if you're listening in today, you can make some change. And you've heard how Christine made some change. This is not for people who've got it all figured out. This is for people who want to figure it out. Have you learned anything else besides these steps that have really helped people get started on making some change around this that you want to share? And then I want to put one more slide up.
Yeah, in fact, I just created a whole online class around helping people just get started and make these first steps. And what I want to say about step one quickly is that this is about sort of taming some of the numbing behaviors, right? When we actually slow down and let ourselves stare into space while we wait in line at the grocery store instead of checking our phone, for example, what will come up is a lot of guilt and anxiety or boredom, things that we think we don't want to feel. But when we let ourselves feel those things, first of all, there's kind of a detox thing that happens around that, right? But it doesn't last forever. But when we let ourselves feel the things we think we don't want to feel, instead of numbing them by staying busy all the time, we open up those positive effects that come from those positive emotions that we talked about earlier, right? So if you want to really feel profound gratitude or real happiness or whatever, on the positive side, you have to let yourself feel the negative stuff too. You can't selectively numb emotions. You can't numb anxiety and expect to feel really happy, because your system just doesn't work that way. These numbing behaviors that we have, mostly checking all the time, but it could, or staying busy or whatever it is that you're doing to numb those emotions, they're very effective. at numbing. But those emotions don't go away. They're not effective at processing emotions or getting rid of them, and they block the positive stuff as well.
Wow. What's amazing in what you're talking about again is we do also help people learn some of these skills, and I love that you pointed out that you kind of almost have to help them get comfortable with the feelings that make them feel a little anxious that might surface when they get rid of some of those numbing behaviors. That's so spot on. I'm so glad you're offering that course. That sounds like a great course. Hey, Bree, I'm going to have you skip ahead 2 slides because, again, we want to get to question and answers soon. So we've learned a lot about the science of what makes us happier, and this is a chance where we get to ask some questions. I have a couple people who are actually going to share a question and an appreciation, and I did want to make sure that people knew that there were really some follow-up resources available. So before we get to the questions, I'm going to have Emma talk a little bit about the work flexibility resources, and ThirdPath talk about our resources, and then we'll open it up for some questions. Emma, you want to talk about slide number 17?
Sure, I'll be very brief, just to note that we do have a number of resources on our site around guides for requesting Flex, for making the business case for Flex, and we have a couple of other webinars around making flexibility work and requesting Flex that actually was with Jessica as well. So we will share those resources in a blog post afterwards. And also we have a great Q&A with Christine on our site as well, so please do check it out. And Jessica, I'll turn back over to you for slide 18, I guess. Please.
Yeah, and first, if you, Bree, if you can put up slide 17 so people can see, those are the resources that we're talking about that 1 Million for Work Flexibility has for you. Again, I've just been so impressed with you guys and what you're doing to get the word out about why we can work flexibly. On today's call really proves that it's not just good for us, it's going to be really good for our families, good for our organizations to create that space where we have some fun and joy and laughter in our lives. Slide 18 is a little bit about ThirdPath resources, and then we're going to get to question and answers. So Bree, if you can put up slide 18. So we, again, want to just remind you that every second Thursday of the month, we do have these Thursday with ThirdPath webinars. You can join us. They're free. We have wonderful people like Christine who share wisdom with us about why we can live the lives we want, follow that third path, that integrated approach to work and life. And we have a great event actually happening next week in Philadelphia if you want to learn more about that too. So let's go to questions and answers. I think we have a couple of people listening today who we're going to hear from first, and then we'll take some text questions if we can. Bree, did you want to see if Jill Farmer or one of the other participants wanted to ask a question or share an appreciation?
Sure, yep. So Jill, I'm taking you off mute if you want to speak up with your question. And it looks like you're also self-muted, so if you can unmute yourself, then you'll be able to speak.
Hi, can you hear me?
That might... Yes, there's Jill.
Hi, Christine. Thanks for so much fabulous information in the book, and it's great stuff. So I see exactly what you're saying happening a lot in my coaching practice, where people who actually begin to play with giving themselves some more space find that they're getting a lot more done in less time. Can you give some specific examples, either from your own life or from people you've worked with, life and experiences where sort of striving striving less and stepping off the hamster wheel has actually increased their ability to create in meaningful work and experience meaningful success?
Sure. Yeah, I see it with virtually everyone I work with. And I think that the most profound way that it starts happening is that, I mean, there is sort of a virtuous cycle that happens. So, like, for example, I was just working with a woman who is the executive producer of a magazine in New York, and you can imagine the busyness that comes with that kind of a job. And by dedicating, I mean, it took a couple of weeks, but she sort of reined her email in. We worked with her on that, and she basically stopped checking her email before she got into work in the morning and once she got home at night. And then that opened up a ton of space for her to take the dog to the park, to have to do these other things that don't seem so productive. And what we saw in her life and her work was a really major transformation in that she was suddenly able to do all her editing work during the workday at a time when normally she would just be in meetings and responding to emails and just sort of putting out fires. And for her, it made a big difference for all the people that she was working with because they were suddenly getting feedback from her during the workday instead of at night. And it created, I mean, the other thing that she started doing with her team was like actually insisting that people take lunch. And so they all started eating lunch together in one of the conference rooms instead of in front of their computers. And what they found was like spontaneously, there was just all this joy. They had time to see each other as people, to sort of debrief personal things that were happening. It created a lot more connection as a team. And that, I mean, that connection and that positivity led to much greater efficiency, higher creativity, higher productivity at work. I don't know if that's the type of thing that you're looking for.
That's a perfect story. Wonderful story. Hey, Emma, we're looking at the clock. Do we have another minute for one more person, or are we running out of time?
Yeah, I think we can fit in one more person.
I had asked to see if Hazel Stewart was going to be able to share a question. I don't know if she's available, or Andy Agnew.
Hi, Hazel. You're off mute now if you'd like to speak.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Perfect.
Yep.
Oh, okay. Hi. I was having some technical difficulties, but I was able to listen to most of it.
Did you have a question, Hazel, or an appreciation from what you heard?
No, no, I don't have a question. I was just having flashbacks about when I was working and how this would play out in my work life.
Yeah, it was the opposite of what Christine's talking about. You know, not a whole lot of time for breaks and creativity, if I remember correctly.
Right. You know, we had goals. It was a constant grind to meet these goals, and I remember at certain times of the year, like when our fiscal year was to come to an end. I mean, I felt like a hamster on a treadmill trying to close out cases.
Yeah. Well, I think what you're raising, Hazel, is that I think there's an incredible amount we can do ourselves, and that probably what we're going to see in the next 5 years or so is teams like that lunch example, leaders and teams understanding the importance of doing this differently and collectively working together to set some boundaries, and that will make a huge difference in our workplaces as well. So there's a lot we can do as individuals. And I think that's a really important message today, is that we really can make a difference in our own lives today, especially if we're willing to sit with that uncomfortable feelings that might get surfaced when we slow down. But there's then the next step we need to do where we start working with teams to help them think about this. So thanks for listening in, Hazel. That's really wonderful.
Thank you.
Emma, tell me what you'd like to do next.
Pardon me, sorry?
Well, should we wrap it up soon, or do we have time for one more person?
I think,
Christine, I just wanted to say that I actually need to hop off here. Since
okay, wonderful. Well, Emma, do you want to wrap it up then?
well, this has been so wonderful. Thank you so much, Christine, for your time. Thank you to ThirdPath for joining with 1 million for this event. We're so pleased to work with you to promote Flex and the integrated life. And thank you, everybody, to our audience for joining us. And this event, as we said, will be recorded, so or has been recorded, and will be up on our YouTube channel. And thanks again to our panelists and our audience.
Thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you so much, Christine. Thank you for your wonderful work. It's making a big difference in the world.
Thank you.